My mother-in-law wore a white dress to our wedding and embarrassed herself. I'm completely confused. Help me out, I'm getting married soon. We're having a traditional wedding. I'm Indian, my fiancé is not, but he was okay with the idea of an Indian wedding. My future mother-in-law asked me if she could wear white to our wedding, and I said yes. Now, my fiancé is really angry with me. He says she'll try to steal the spotlight, that she'll definitely show up in a long white dress, and that it was very irresponsible of me to agree to it so easily. The thing is, I'm not planning to wear a white wedding dress. I'll be wearing a traditional red dress which, because of its silk-like fabric and embroidery, is very different from what the other guests will be wearing. So even if my mother-in-law wears a white wedding dress, it won't be the same, right? And yes, maybe I'm being a bit clueless, but I don't really understand why it matters if my mother-in-law wears white. Even if I were wearing white too. As long as my fiancé doesn't mistake me for her and marry the wrong person. What difference does it make? I'm sorry if this sounds like a dumb question, but my fiancé is genuinely upset that I didn't stop my mother-in-law, and I need help understanding the situation. I don't want to upset him. Edited. My fiancé knows what my wedding dress looks like. He's seen it. For those asking whether my mother-in-law knows what my dress looks like, I'm not sure. We've discussed the wedding details, but we haven't talked specifically about what I'll be wearing. I think she might have been a bit confused when I said she could wear white. But maybe I'm just projecting, because the whole conversation was a little unclear. Comments. Judging by my fiancé's reaction, it seems like my mother-in-law might have a history of inappropriate or attention-seeking behavior, and he's trying to break that cycle. I should talk to him to come to a unified stance, and maybe in the future, tell my mother-in-law that everything needs to be approved by him. But I think it would be hilarious if she thought she was outshining everyone, only to see me, the bride, in red. My fiancé should totally play along with this, acting like everything's fine, while they're all impressed and wondering what's going on. Based on this post, it seems like my mother-in-law has never been to an Indian wedding and has no idea what she's in for. You'd have to get up really early to outshine an Indian wedding procession. I went to one years ago. Oh my God, the fabrics, the jewelry, the gold. It was so luxurious. White won't stand out the way she thinks it will. Honestly, I don't understand why future mothers-in-law or other guests want to wear white too. Steal the spotlight from the bride, so they can have people come up to them and ask, "Are you the bride?" and then demurely say, "No," blushing and giggling. In my opinion, anyone who wears white to a wedding will either be mocked or be left with concerns about their mental health. This is a polished translation that conveys your feelings and concerns in a clear and thoughtful manner. I hope it captures the nuance of the situation. Let me know if you'd like any changes or further clarifications. Update. As many of you suggested, I talked to my fiancé about why he was so upset. He explained that his mother had joked before about wearing white, and he had told her very clearly that she wasn't allowed to do that. He didn't tell me about this because he didn't want to stress me out. According to him, she has spent his whole life trying to pull attention toward herself, and it's something that has left him with emotional baggage. So when I told his mother that she could wear white, he was really hurt that I gave her permission after he had explicitly forbidden it. He admitted that it wasn't fair for him to get so angry, considering he hadn't shared any of this context with me. We agreed to communicate better going forward, and we reconciled. Then he asked me to call his mother and tell her she couldn't wear white. Otherwise, she wouldn't be allowed at the wedding. I really didn't want to do that, because it felt like a guaranteed way to start open conflict. And, as I've said before, I personally don't care if she wears white. I told him that if he wanted her to hear that message, he could tell her himself. But he insisted that I was the one who had to say it, because I was the one who gave her permission. We were starting to argue again, so I showed him this post and all your comments. That helped him realize that even if his mother wears white, she still won't stand out, at least not in a flattering way. And he really liked the idea of simply not telling her that I won't be wearing white. So most likely we'll suggest that she buy a sari. But if she decides to show up in white, we're not going to stop her. Thank you to everyone who shared advice. I'll try to update again after the wedding. Before we continue, I want to note that a sari is traditional women's clothing on the Indian subcontinent. Also, I'd like to hear your opinion. What would you do in the author's place? Would you tell the mother-in-law she can't come if she wears white? Or would you avoid calling her like the author did? Personally, I think the author made the right choice. If the fiancé wants his mother uninvited for wearing white, then he should be the one to call her. Otherwise, it feels like he's tossing the hot potato to her. Like, no, you call her because I'm scared, or something like that. Now let's continue. Update from the fiancé. Given how everything turned out, I felt it was only right for me to write an update myself. I'm the author's former fiancé. After Pia, not her real name, posted her story, a lot of commenters pointed out that I was in the wrong, that I should have dealt with my mother myself, and that I was especially wrong for getting angry at Pia without explaining anything to her. I didn't want to admit it, but the more comments I read, the harder it became to ignore. I don't have a good relationship with my mother. She used to demand gifts for my birthday because I wouldn't exist without her. For the first 18 years of my life, I never opened a single birthday present myself. Looking back, I realized that every event, from sports games to graduation, was always about her. I always felt like my life and my accomplishments were just extensions of her own. I think I suppressed all my frustration because everyone around acted like that was normal. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I simply tried to get as far away from her as possible. I applied to the farthest university I realistically had a chance to get into and kept my distance, because every time I had to come home, the whole cycle repeated. In college, I was lucky enough to meet Pia, and for the first time I started to genuinely like who I was. I didn't have to downplay my achievements or even my failures, and her family was so warm and welcoming that my own childhood felt like some nightmare. I'd escaped. I thought that now, as an adult, I'd be able to handle things. Everyone always says not to poke a sleeping dog, and during the hardest moments, I found myself resenting my wonderful fiancé for having such a loving family, even though they treated me like one of their own. I was ashamed of my mother's behavior and of my own resentment, so I pretended everything was fine. Until I read this post in the comments, I don't think I even understood how important my wedding was to me. Of course, marrying the woman of my dreams is meaningful. On its own, that's obvious, but I mean the details of the ceremony itself. I had a very clear picture of what I wanted my wedding to look like. But the mix of childhood trauma and the idea that weddings are the bride's day and men aren't supposed to care about the details kept me from ever expressing it. I also didn't realize just how desperately I wanted this event to be about me and not about my mother. This awful cocktail of repressed emotions led me to lash out unfairly at Pia when my mother tried to pull her usual stunt again. In that moment, I completely forgot that white isn't even a wedding color in Indian culture. I felt a cold sweat run through me at the thought that yet another important moment of my life might be stolen by my mother. I think Pia was shocked by my outburst, since she had never seen me like that before, and she made that post to get an outside perspective. Neither of us had any idea what the consequences would be. I read every single comment at least 10 times. I couldn't stop thinking about them. Unwanted memories kept forcing their way back into my mind, no matter how hard. I tried to bury myself in work or exhaust myself at the gym. That night, I had a full-on mental breakdown. I just cried and cried. It was probably one of the lowest points of my life. The next morning, I expected to wake up alone with a message saying the wedding was off. But Pia stayed. She convinced me to start therapy, supported me through the first brutal sessions, and gave me space whenever I needed it. Therapy really helped. I learned to understand where my anger and resentment came from and how to handle those feelings instead of trying to ignore them. I had already apologized to Pia before, but therapy allowed me to be truly honest with her about my family. It transformed our relationship. I also took over wedding planning with the help of my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and it turned out to be wonderful. I was able to actually design the wedding of my dreams. My mother-in-law later told me she felt a huge sense of relief when we switched roles because my wonderful Pia didn't care about the flowers or the decor and barely involved herself at all. As long as we were getting married, she was happy. As you've probably gathered from her post, she's a very relaxed, low-maintenance person. She joked that all she needed was for us to exchange garlands and call it a day. My mother-in-law was incredibly supportive and patient, letting me express all my ideas. She even suggested things I hadn't thought of but ended up loving, like arriving at the ceremony on horseback. We now have an inside joke that I'm more like her child than Pia's, because our tastes match so perfectly, and the wedding itself turned out absolutely beautiful. Pia was ready to revoke my parents' invitation after everything that happened, but her terrifyingly assertive younger sister suggested inviting them after all, as a final screw you to show that I wasn't alone anymore, and that whatever they tried this time, the day would go my way. I have to admit, those words really stuck with me. So we decided to invite them to the third day of the ceremony, and it worked out even better than I imagined. First of all, it helped that my mother had absolutely no idea what an Indian wedding was like. So when she showed up in a long white ballroom gown made of tulle, security assumed she was at the wrong event and didn't let her in. That wasn't something I planned. But watching her fume at the gate while everyone else walked past was delightful. Second, against the backdrop of embroidered Indian silks and smooth satins, her dress looked embarrassingly cheap. Instead of outshining everyone, she just looked completely out of place. It only drew more attention to how stunning everyone else looked, compared to her relatively plain appearance. Pia looked especially stunning in her red lehenga choli, with intricate henna designs covering her hands and feet. Maybe I'm biased because she's my wife, but she truly has the most beautiful black hair. Indian brides also wear an accessory called a matha patti. It looks like a crown, and it made her look exactly like a princess. In that moment, I forgot about my parents, my anxieties, and the entire world, because I couldn't take my eyes off her. That's when my mother started trying her hardest to disrupt the ceremony. First, she began coughing loudly on purpose, but thankfully, Pia's aunt, who was sitting right next to her, handed her a cough drop. Then she tried striking up a conversation, but Pia's 5-year-old niece immediately chirped, loud enough for everyone to hear in that squeaky little kid voice. "Don't you know it's rude to talk at a wedding? I'm 5, and even I know that." I later found out my amazing sister-in-law coached her specifically for that moment. The third time my mother attempted to interfere, one of Pia's cousins, also prepared by my sister-in-law, jumped up and loudly whispered that the food must have disagreed with my mother and she urgently needed the bathroom. I'm sure you can understand the implication. She practically pushed my mom out of the seating area. After that, my mother stayed silent for the rest of the ceremony, and everyone else simply acted as though she didn't exist. At the reception, the contrast between my mother and everyone else became even clearer because she didn't know any Bollywood or Tollywood dances, so she pivoted back to getting attention through conversations. She turned to my mother-in-law and began complaining about how difficult it had been to raise me. My mother-in-law replied, "No matter how challenging children can be, they bring 10 times more joy simply by growing up. Your son is such a wonderful young man. You must be so proud of him." My mother didn't like where that conversation was going, so she turned to Pia and asked if she was sure she wanted to be with me. And this was after we'd already gotten married. Pia stared at her like she was an idiot and said, "Why would I have married him if I wasn't sure?" My mother then loudly asked again if she was sure, because he used to wet the bed. I hadn't done that since I was 8. But there she was, announcing it to the entire room. In that moment, I genuinely hated her. It felt like there was a lump in my throat, and I couldn't say anything. Pia, however, had no such problem. "You must be confused," she said in a calm, confident voice with just a hint of concern. And for a second, my mother actually looked unsettled. Then Pia raised her voice to be heard over the music. "Dear mother-in-law, I know we're family now, but this is not the time, or ever the time, to hear about your bedroom issues." Then she dragged me onto the dance floor while everyone stared at my mother. And like an idiot, the first thing I said during our first dance as husband and wife was, my mom was telling the truth. But because I'm the luckiest person alive, Pia just squeezed my hand and said it happens to kids when they're stressed, and it wasn't my fault. That was the end of it. I enjoyed the rest of the wedding, the dancing, the food, the conversations with Pia and her, now my family. I saw Pia and my sister-in-law talking to my mother again later, but I was too far away to hear anything. Whatever it was, it didn't turn into a problem, because my sister-in-law kept smiling and my mother didn't try anything else. By the end of the night, my mother looked like she was suffering from the world's worst constipation, but she didn't manage to ruin anything. When I said goodbye to her, I felt this incredible sense of relief, like a weight slid off. My legs and my knees almost buckled. It was the first time in my entire life that she didn't destroy something important to me. After the wedding, I stopped having sudden intrusive memories from the past. I felt unbelievably happy to be married to this woman. And I honestly think I might have done something really stupid after that. Fight if I hadn't read so many comments from strangers, all telling me the same thing, something I couldn't ignore anymore. If anyone is still following our story, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you.